You got Mac here with you on Birds 365, and we got Jon Machota from The Athletic, good enough to jump in with us and talk some football for 15, 20, 25 minutes. John, need to start with the most important question here. Did you have any idea that CeeDee Lamb was as good a dodgeball player as he is?
No, but it doesn't surprise me. Some guys, seems like they're so athletic and they're so good at whatever sport that it wouldn't matter whatever he was playing, he was going to be good at. So, no, I had no idea about that, but I'm sure he'd rather not be playing dodgeball and be getting ready for a Super Bowl right now, though.
That's very true. But let me follow up with one other CeeDee Lamb question. And again, who's what? Oh, John Bell. Sorry, John. John's not going to be happy because it's a non-Eagles question, and God forbid we talk about Andy Reid and Todd Pinkston for 2 minutes. Why aren't you talking about Eagle draft picks 5 months in advance of the April draft? This is a non-Eagles question as well. Two guys who I just can't figure out in the National Football League: Travis Kelce and CeeDee Lamb. They are the main weapon on their team. I know it. You know it. The other team's defensive coordinator should know it. The other team's defensive back should know it. How the hell did they get so wide open? You know that they're going to throw the ball to them. You should be doubled on every single play. We're going to see it in the Super Bowl. Travis Kelce's going to be wide open. How does that happen? And I saw it several games, certainly the two Cowboy games, but other Cowboy games as well. The CeeDee Lamb is just running uncovered in a team secondary. How do defenses allow that to happen?
I do think it speaks to the route running and the greatness of a Travis Kelce and a CeeDee Lamb to be able to do a lot of different things. That's got to be part of it because, let's be honest, there's no Tyreek Hill anymore in Kansas City. So you used to sit there and think, hey, you got to worry about Tyreek too. Well, there's really not. Who are you really worrying about outside Travis Kelce? And same thing in Dallas. Like Brandon Cooks emerged during the second half of the season and looked like a legit number 2 wide receiver. Jake Ferguson, the young tight end, started stepping up a little. But this Cowboys team really didn't have a run game at all. So it was like, if you take away CD, and then here's the other part about the Cowboys. If you took away CD early, his frustration kind of spilled over into the way he played the rest of the game. And so not only playing the Cowboys should you try and take CD away at all costs, you should try and take him away early. And the thing, the Cowboys this season were able to rebound after maybe there was a bad performance and they went back to the drawing board and changed some things up. But those were always after games. It was never in games. In game, when Dak and CD weren't hitting, you knew it was going to be a bad day in the office, and that included the game in Green Bay that ended their season.
Before we get to the most important subject, I did see Luke Kuechly talking about Travis Kelce, and Luke is he's that guy. He was that guy who would call out plays, probably. Like he's got the highest football IQ ever. And he's like, Kelce does stuff that you're not supposed to do. He improvises. And, people are like, they're trying to cover a normal route, and he's just on the same page as Patrick Mahomes. So that part was interesting to me. But I want to give you the floor here, John. Kellen Moore. What are the Eagles getting with Kellen Moore as offensive coordinator?
I've always been a big Kellen Moore fan. When he took over the offense in Dallas in 2019, they were outstanding that year. And then he has to, be part of the coaching change, where obviously the Cowboys thought a lot of him, where how often does a new head coach come in and they're like, we really like you, but we really want you to take this offensive coordinator too, because we think he's one of the young and up-and-coming coaches in the league. And that was part of Mike McCarthy taking the job in Dallas in 2020. And that 2020 pandemic season was terrible for the Cowboys. It was awful. That was first year Mike Nolan being their defensive coordinator. Nothing was good in Dallas. So I understand that somebody could look at that and be like, oh, what happened to Kellen here in 2020? 2021, 2022, goes right back to being one of the best offenses in the league. They part ways and they go in another direction. And he ended up being kind of like a scapegoat here in Dallas. And I
know about that.
Yeah. I was going to get to that.
And I kind of think it's funny because it's like he had a big say in a lot of their success here because of the fact that, yes, in the last 3 years, they've won 12 games in a row. Well, he's been a big part of those first 2 years where that happened. And down here, it was kind of one of those things where, wow, the offense looks pretty good and Dak's playing well and they're winning 12 games, but what aren't they doing? They're not winning in the playoffs. So what are we going to do? The head coach isn't going anywhere. Jerry Jones isn't going anywhere. Dak Prescott isn't going anywhere. Dan Quinn, this is the best defense has looked in decades. He's not going anywhere. So it was almost like one of those things where fans, I think, gravitated towards it almost to like comfort themselves and like, no, this will be different this year. We'll be better this year. We got a new offensive coordinator. It's like, do you think it's going to be better? You don't know. Like, and Mike McCarthy in the first year calling plays, it was a good offense. I didn't see anything that I thought like, wow, this was way better than when Kellen was here. It was pretty comparable, to be honest with you. So I think Kellen gets kind of a bad rap, but I certainly think he's still one of the best young coaches in the NFL.
What was Dak's stance when Kellen was told his services were no longer needed, and Dak's stance on the offense this year with McCarthy calling plays? Just a good team soldier and gives you the company line, or maybe off the record, yeah, we missed him. Yeah, no, McCarthy was actually better. What do you think the quarterback's take was on the difference between last year of Kellen Moore, first year McCarthy calling plays?
I don't know that Dak Prescott will ever reach that ultimate success and win a Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys, but I don't think anybody can handle the off the field being the Dallas Cowboys quarterback better than Dak can. I mean, he is the perfect person for that, the way he carries himself. But no, it was very evident when Kellen first left that Dak was not happy about it. I mean, they had grown together. I mean, Kellen Moore was a teammate of his in 2016. Kellen Moore was supposed to be the guy that took over when Romo went down, and then Dak came out of nowhere after Kellen Moore got hurt, and then it ended up being like, oh no, this is Dak's show now. And then the following year, now Kellen Moore's the quarterback coach, and then he goes to OC. So they had a close bond. I mean, they had worked together as players and quarterback coach and then coordinator. So no, Dak was not happy about it at first. And I think it took him a little bit of time to get used to McCarthy. But I would say as we stand here today, I think him and McCarthy are as close as they've ever been. And so that's probably a good thing for the offense. But by no means was Dak ready for a change or thought that Kellen Moore needed to go.
Jody mentioned a little bit of incestuousness, and if that's a word, in the NFC East. Dan Quinn going over to Washington to be the head coach. I think we all look at Dan and say, boy, really good defensive coordinator. The Cowboys have had a really good defense, and then the playoffs came, and it just looked bad. And I often wonder, because owners in this league can be almost as impatient as fans, and one game can mean a lot. And I think I thought Dan would be back in Seattle. I thought they were setting up that whole thing, and all of a sudden the Cowboys had that game defensively in the playoffs. How did that go over, John?
You and me both thought he'd be in Seattle, so it is interesting. I don't know if that Green Bay game changed their thinking, but that obviously didn't go well. And it wasn't because it'd be one thing. It was just like one. There were some of those against San Francisco earlier this year. There was a game that looked like that against Buffalo this year. And particularly their biggest issues was stopping the run. They couldn't do it. And it's been that way now for a couple of years, and it hasn't really improved. The other thing is that he hasn't fared well against some of those, the NFC West young gun coaches in McVay and Shanahan. And so that's part of where I'm thinking like, well, that could factor in the Seattle decision as well. So it is interesting he ends up in Washington. I would not have predicted that when the season ended. And Washington waiting as long as they did to make a high coaching hire, I don't know this to be a fact, but it certainly, the optics of it look like they didn't get their top couple candidates.
No, they wanted Ben Johnson.
Right.
Ben's looking for $15 million a year as a first-time head coach. So, yeah.
And to be honest with you, I don't really have an issue with that because I would want some stability. I would look over at Frank Reich. I would look over at Carolina, who wanted Ben Johnson the year before, and go, oh, yeah, the number one pick. You got the quarterback you wanted. You're gone. You don't even get a full season.
Yeah.
Why am I going to go to Washington? I'll get the 2 pick. I get Drake May. This thing isn't going well early. Maybe I got to put Sam Howell back in there, and next thing I know that I'm on pins and needles thinking I'm going to lose my job. Nah, I'll run it back with this Detroit squad one more year. They got a good offense. Like there's something about the Washington, Carolina type jobs where it's easier to go to Seattle. It's easy to go to the Baltimore Ravens, Packers, Steelers, some of these organizations like that. Heck, even the Eagles. Washington is not one of those.
Yeah.
And so I certainly think that Dan's a good. I just one of those things. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it would not surprise me if he's the right guy and ends up for where they are as an organization. And people will look back on this and be like, man, remember that? That wasn't even like their first pick. And that might have been the perfect thing. Because I wonder if a young first-time head coach is the right thing for where Washington is right now. I think Dan Quinn could be a good coach there, because the thing I keep going back to, people like to ding Dan's resume for the Super Bowl loss. Yeah. I like to just take it to before the game started and say, he took the Atlanta Falcons to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I know. I say the same thing here, John.
Crazy.
The Eagles made the Super Bowl last year, and so many Eagles fans don't look at that as an accomplishment, right? Because they already had them winning. It's really hard to get to a Super Bowl. Now, Patrick Mahomes makes it look easy. Tom Brady did, and that kind of skews everything. It's really hard to make the Super Bowl, especially if you're the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. So that was a hell of an accomplishment. I'm with you 100%.
And I don't want to do this, but I feel the need to, because it's the way that I look at things. Are we prejudging Joshua Harris as the owner of the Skins? Do we hold him accountable for the Washington unshaky ownership for the last 5, 10, 15? That's Dan Snyder. You want to put on Dan Snyder? Go ahead. Beat the snot out of him. He's done and he's gone. Don't we have to give Joshua Harris the chance to prove that he isn't a overreactive, my God, 1 year you suck, you're gone type of owner? I don't know. In Philadelphia, most of the Sixer fans are not big Joshua Harris fans, but I won't hold his ownership of the Redskins against them in comparison to the 76ers. But don't you think it'd be a good job?
Just a different ownership, to me, from where Washington was, is a positive. I mean, and also if you're Joshua Harris, think about where the bar is right now. You just have to just do some basic okay things, and people will be like, all right, wow, look at this. Like, if they're able to get a new stadium, forget what even happens on the field. If they can even get a new stadium, you're just like, okay, well, this is at least the bar was so low for that ownership group, and so I just think Dan Quinn will end up being it's a good hire for right now. Do I think he's going to take Washington to the Super Bowl in the next few years like he did in Atlanta? I don't. I think it's going to be a little bit.
Drake May could be that good.
Could be.
Just saying.
Could be. And we see down in Houston how quickly if you get
By the
that
way,
right quarterback.
It's very early in the process, but I've becoming a Jaden Daniels fan. I like him better than both Drake May and Kellen. I saw that Caleb Williams play against Notre Dame. I go, what the hell is this? That's one of the worst games I've seen from a number one type level prospect. So I'm probably overreacting to that, but we got plenty of time to talk about the draft. The Cowboys have to find a DC. Could we see a trade? Ron Rivera talk, Dallas. Mike Zimmer wants back at 67. He is older than Vic, by the way, Jody. Vic Fangio, 67 years old. Al Harris. A lot of people talking about Al Harris down there. You want to elevate him? I'll tell you, if they want to elevate Al Harris, John, we went through a season where the Eagles hired young coordinators, and they weren't about growing pains. So you kind of have to understand there's going to be growing pains with a young coach if they go that route. What are your early indications about the next defensive coordinator?
I'd be really surprised if they went with a first-time DC. Mike McCarthy being in the last year of his contract. I know that Joe Witt Jr. would be the natural replacement because he's been in the system. He knows what Dan Quinn liked. He'd worked with Dan Quinn before, Dallas, and then he has a long track record with Mike McCarthy. But I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying I'll be surprised if that happens because I'm going off of what I've seen over the last decade plus. And in the last decade, the Cowboys have not had a defensive coordinator that hadn't previously been an NFL head coach, much less a defensive coordinator in the NFL. So that you got to go back to 2013. Monty Kiffin's the last defensive coordinator the Cowboys have had that did not have head coaching experience. And then Mike McCarthy's side of it, you go all the way back to, I think, 2009. You got Dom Capers. Dom Capers had previous head coaching experience. When they moved on from Dom Capers, Mike Pettin had previous head coaching experience. He comes to Dallas. His DC hire is Mike Nolan. It didn't work out, but previous head coaching experience. Yeah. Dan Quinn, like to just all of a sudden in the final year of a contract, which could be your last year, that's where the Ron Rivera thing, that's when the Mike Zimmer thing, Brandon Staley, the wild card here that a lot of people will talk about down here would be Mike Vrabel. But if you're Mike McCarthy, do you want a guy coming in there
Yeah.
that's really saying he
Yeah.
could be your next head coach? So
Yeah.
I don't know that you'd love that, but that's where I'm leaning. And I think the longer this plays out, the more that's the chance. Because let's be honest, if you wanted it to be Joe Witt or Al Harris or the defensive line coach Adam Durde, you could do that today. You could do
Yeah.
that. You could have
Yeah.
done that yesterday when Dan Quinn, the news came out he was going to Washington.
So let me ask you this. Jerry Jones took a stance. Season ended, rumors, whispers all over the place. We're going through the same thing here in Philadelphia. And Jeff Lurie and Howie Roseman stayed behind closed doors when Jeff wasn't out shopping for a yacht. But other than that, they did not put their opinion on whether a coaching change was needed or not. Jerry came out right away and said, McCarthy's my coach. You can just stop all your talk about it. He chose a specific way to handle business. The Eagles did it opposite. I'm not saying which was right or which was wrong. You weren't surprised that Jerry grabbed the mic, right? Given a chance, Jerry's going to make an announcement. That's what Jerry does. He's a very hands-on type owner. If he hadn't done that, I think you would have had a bigger story in Dallas than we had here in Philadelphia. That what the hell are the Eagles going to do? You weren't surprised Jerry gave McCarthy a verbal backing even after that playoff loss, right?
Well, he didn't do it right after the game, and he had multiple opportunities. So we'll at least say that he had at least to think about it for a couple of days before it was done. But if you just look at the way Jerry Jones has made decisions over the last decade, it would have been a surprise for him to move on. The Cowboys, they've drafted well, but they haven't been really that aggressive, whether you could talk about free agency, moves like that, like the gambler Jerry Jones, the Wildcatter, that was more of the 90s Jerry Jones. We haven't really seen that in a decade plus down here. And so that's why that Mike McCarthy, sticking with him another year, lines up with where Jerry's thinking's at. And let's be honest, I don't think that they needed to make a change just to make a change. Me personally, I thought it would have been interesting and worthwhile for Bill Belichick just because of where this team's at. Like you talking about like some of the hot head coaching candidates going into this cycle, Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick. I don't think that a young first-time head coach is what this team needed. But a guy like Belichick, with the skins on the wall that he has, I get a lot of people will say maybe the game's passed him by or whatever. That would have intrigued me. But I wouldn't have made just a change to make a change because, again, they have won 12 games each the last 3 seasons. They do have a talented roster. This isn't – I think some people get it skewed that the NFL just hypes up the Cowboys or something so they get in these playoff games like it's some invitational or something. Like, they've been a really good team the last 3 years. The parity in the NFL is set up that you don't win 12 games each of the last 3 years. Their problem is that they can't do it in the playoffs. And nobody in that building, just like nobody here or anybody listening – nobody has an idea of exactly how you get past that. I mean, Dak Prescott after that game, when talking about the way he played and things like that, that's the most, I feel like, lost for words I've ever seen Dak Prescott. They don't have the answers to why they play like that in the playoffs.
Yeah, I was about to say, because that was just from the coin toss on. I mean, and Jody loves that. You know, Matt LaFleur showed the courage. Yeah, give him the ball. They went right down the field. They wanted to set the tone. Jordan Love got hot at the right time. Boy, he's talented. I love him long term. The Packers ran him out of the building, and the Cowboys don't lose at AT&T Stadium. I can't come up with a reason why that happened. You kind of alluded to it there. Are the Cowboys Dak the same way? It's like, wow, that was like somebody just came in, punched you in the face, and said, "All right, we're just going to steal this from you." They look at a loss for words figuratively in that game.
Yeah, and here's the thing, too, about the offense. That's the offense they had on the field that they had at the start of training camp. It's not like they were dealing with a bunch of injuries. Like, you're playing at home. That's where you're most comfortable. Like, there was no excuses for the offense not to play well. Now, the defense, they were missing some pieces. But still, Green Bay, I get it if they win the game late or something like to just dominate you from the beginning at home where you had won 16 in a row, that made no sense. And that's why I think even like Michael Parsons, obviously one of probably the best quote on the team, didn't talk after the game, didn't do his podcast the week after, just finally did it yesterday the day before. I mean, it's one of those things where you could tell everybody was stunned. Michael Parsons said on his podcast that he was embarrassed to even go out in public like a week after the game. And I totally get that. I mean, that is a complete head scratcher. There's no excuse for the way they play. Mike McCarthy characterized it as a bad. We picked a bad day to have a bad game, and I'm just like, you picked a bad day to have maybe the worst game we've ever seen you play. Because I understand Green Bay looked good against the Niners, surprised me with how good they looked, but I still don't even think that was a Green Bay thing. I think that was more about the Cowboys than it was about the Packers. When it looked that lopsided, I don't buy that it was just the Packers just had they had the secret sauce or whatever. That was more about the Cowboys to me, and something that needs to get fixed, whether it's behind the scenes or whatnot. Maybe it's a new head coach eventually, but that's inexcusable. It's too good of a team to lose like that.
In many ways, though, John, does that, because it was such an outlier, does that, I don't know the right word, but do you kind of just write it off? I know it's hard to write off a playoff game, especially in Dallas, and especially with the recent history, but it was just one of those games. He called it was a bad day to have a bad day, so to speak. And they just had a bad day. Is there something to say for not overreacting to that? Even though it's really difficult, you got to be really disciplined. But Jerry didn't overreact to that. Can that be a good thing?
It can, but I lean more towards it's not a good thing because this is a team that hasn't won, or a franchise that hasn't won a Super Bowl or even been in the NFC Championship game in 28 years. And their problems have been in the playoffs. And so if you're a player on that team and that season ends that way, no matter how good things go during the regular season this next year, no matter how good of a training camp you have, you could win 15 games next year. When that first playoff game starts, wild card, heck, maybe you win you get the 1 seed and you're hosting the divisional round. You don't think that they show up at that stadium that doesn't creep in just a little bit? This team that can't get past the playoffs, I find it very hard to believe.
Especially with Dak. Yeah.
And I find it hard to believe in this social media era with these guys that live on their phones that isn't that added pressure to them as well. I don't care what they do during the regular season. Soon as January starts, whenever their first playoff game is, if they make the playoffs, that will be in their head for sure. I don't see how it wouldn't.
A little bit of a semantical debate. When Nick Sirianni, when the Eagles had their postseason press conference and the coach and the general manager got up there, Nick Sirianni did an outstanding job of selling the fact that he made the decision to fire Sean Desai. 11 games into this, 10-3 at the time. Shoot, after the Cowboy game, the Cowboys got Sean Desai fired, or pushed up.
Demoted.
That's right. I don't want to say fired. To eat hot dogs in the booth rather than call the place. To me, that's a fireable offense. If you did it, Coach Nick, and it was your call, and you went to your boss and said, we need this drastic change, and Matt Patricia's just the guy, that's a fireable offense. What the Cowboys did against the Packers, that's a fireable offense with the continued playoff shortcomings, including under McCarthy. Now, they both dodged the bullet. They're both back as head coach this year. And people are saying that Sirianni is a lame duck. I choose a different word. I choose a hot seat coach. He's certainly he starts the season on the hot seat because of what happened with the Eagles collapsing the way they did. I'd certainly say the same about McCarthy, but I even go that step further and say he's a lame duck coach because he's only got 1 year left to go. So how does that play in Dallas this year? We've speculated, and we'll do it all the way up until the season starts on how Sirianni's going to handle coaching on this hot seat. How does McCarthy handle it as a lame duck coach in Dallas?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It worked out the first time with Jason Garrett's contract. The second time it didn't. So this is Jerry Jones just following along what he's been doing the last couple of times these contracts have come up with his head coaches. So it'll be interesting. I think that we'll know early on in the season. That's the thing. That 2010 season when Jason Garrett ended up being the interim coach, things just didn't go well early in the season for Wade Phillips, and it was trending in that direction, which is kind of interesting when we talk about the defensive coordinator hire too, because if you just promote somebody within, what if things are going so poorly that you move on from Mike McCarthy? Who's your head coach? There wouldn't be one on the staff that anybody would point to. Brian Schottenheimer, whoever that DC would be that's from the staff. I mean, I don't see Jerry Jones allowing that to happen. That's where I think Jerry would step in and be like, no, we need somebody with a little bit more experience there. But Mike's got so much skin on the wall from just his resume. I mean, if he doesn't coach anymore after this season, his resume is one of the better ones in the NFL history. I mean, he's won a Super Bowl. He's been a long time head coach. He's had a lot of playoff appearances. Now, So I think for him, and where he's different from Sirianni is just the experience that he has. He's been in a lot of different situations where he knows that, hey, I might be coaching for my job this season. He might have felt that way last year, to be honest with you, going into playoffs and things like that. So being a veteran coach, I think he'll be able to handle it pretty well. I do think that the players really like him. He is a player's coach for sure. And so I don't see them just kind of folding up shop and being like, all right, we're done for this season early on. Now, maybe midway, towards the end of the season, maybe that happens because they see the writings on the wall that they're getting a new head coach. But I think that they'll play hard for him. I think there is good leadership on the team, but it is a tough spot. I also could kind of make the argument, though, in the NFL nowadays, do you really get 3 years, 4 years to be a coach anymore? Like, I almost think it is a year-to-year thing where you're just like, man, we have a bad year, I could get fired here. Because even with the Nick Sirianni thing, and I'm not a big Nick Sirianni fan, I think he makes it about himself way too much as a coach. He got them to the Super Bowl last year. Like, I don't know how you can move on from that guy only a year later. He deserves the ability to try and fix
667 winning percentage, Sean, with 3 consecutive playoff berths. Yeah,
to lose both your coordinators,
to being fired. He was ordered, you know, that close to being fired.
Yeah, and that's tough to lose both your coordinators if you go to the Super Bowl and just think like, oh no, it's fine, we'll just run it back, we'll be good. Like, I mean, that's a lot of moving pieces to replace those 2 important positions, and so yeah, I think it would be ridiculous to get rid of him after a year removed from the Super Bowl.
At Jon Machota, follow John on X, Twitter. Read him at theathletic.com. Does a tremendous job with covering the Dallas Cowboys. I'll end it here with you in the fact that we talked about Dan Quinn, Washington, the incestual nature. How bad would it be for Jerry Jones if, I don't know, 1 week Dan Quinn holds the Cowboys to 20, you get a big upset, then Kellen Moore puts a 40 spot on him? How bad would that be for Jerry Jones?
It'll be really bad because the fans will be even more frustrated than they are right now. And this is about as frustrated they've probably been in a long time. But to see that happen, that would not be good.
It's going to be a lot of fun storylines in the NFC.
Here, I'll give you a storyline coming off of that. If Kellen Moore and that offense look great, let's say the Eagles get back to the Super Bowl and the Cowboys imploded, Kellen Moore would be very high on the list of guys I could see Jerry Jones going after to be the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys.
The Eagles might have to fire Nick Sirianni Kellen Moore.
I know Jerry.
That'll be in Philadelphia Munch. I guarantee you. Phone lines on WIP. Get Nick out of here.
And by the way,
we can't. Oh my God, we can't lose Kellen Moore. I guarantee you that's the song.
And guys, I'm rooting for Chip Kelly to get to Washington as the offensive coordinator. We'll have all this Chip Kelly in Washington, Dan Quinn in Washington, Kellen Moore in Philadelphia.
Wow, a
lot of good stuff in the NFC East coming up this year.
Strange bedfellows. That's what we like about the National Football League. Johnny Machota, always a pleasure whenever you come on with us. Thank you very much for doing it. Good luck to CeeDee Lamb. I don't know if did he do the golf thing too? Dodgeball. I know he was great at dodgeball, but I guess.
Did you like the movie Dodgeball? Patches O'Houlihan, guys. Duck, dip, dodge, and I forget the last one. I think it was dodge again.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. No, good movie. I enjoyed it for sure.
I watched it. I've forgotten it. But CeeDee Lamb kicked ass in dodgeball yesterday. We'll see if any of the Eagles or the Cowboys do better in the Pro Bowl, because that's all we got this weekend. No football. You got to wait around for the stinking Super Bowl for 2 weeks, so you're stuck watching dodgeball with the NFL players. Machota will enjoy, as we did, having him here with us today. Thanks, JM.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
That is Jon Machota here with us on Bird Street.
Patches O'Houlihan, greatest dodgeball coach of all time. We're talking about coaches. Patches.
Is that the name of the dodgeball guy? I saw the movie. It's not one that I can quote or give you a rundown of the characters in. Delaware Valley Insurance time. Birds fans, here's your chance to save up to 40% on your car insurance right now for one of JAKIB Sports' great partners. Here's what you need to do. Call one of the 2 managing partners, either Jim or Fran, and tell them you're a friend of both JAKIB Sports and Birds 365.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Del Val Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!